London, England, 1887. William Jones sits backstage under a large tent, surrounded by Lakota warriors and American cowboys, with the pungent smell of gathered livestock permeating the air. Every few minutes, he glances at a cordoned-off section of seats, as does everyone else in the building. The seats are reserved for Queen Victoria. She, along with visiting dignitaries from throughout Europe, will be in the audience for this afternoon's performance of Buffalo Bill Cody's Wild West show. The show presents a recreated look at life in the Old West, with mock battles, dances, and demonstrations of marksmanship and horsemanship. However, as excited as this London audience is to see the legendary figures they have heard so much about from America, it is their countryman, William Jones, they are perhaps most excited to see. But William, a 48-year-old native of Castle Precincts, Bristol, is tired. His body aches from the rheumatism that plagues him. He has not slept well and dreads the task before him. This is all too understandable, as his job for the day will entail recounting, quite literally in front of Queen and country, the reasons why he had laid awake on so many nights for the better part of the last decade. Last night, his mind had, yet again, begun to race every time he finally began to drift off to sleep. Every few hours he had managed to finally fall into slumber, only to find himself back in the nightmare. The screams, the smoke, the gunfire, the pure, primal fear, it all came flooding back, jolting him awake and rendering him progressively more irritable and confused with every passing hour. Now, as Queen Victoria is shown to her seat, the torrent of emotions floods back into William's mind again. What is he doing here? How had he survived? And why had others not? How can he convey to these people, to the Queen for whom he had fought, the horrors that he and his comrades had been through that sweltering day in South Africa? The weight of his Victoria Cross feels odd to him, tugging down on the breast of his jacket. Though he is immensely proud of this great honor that he has earned, the price he has paid often leaves him wondering, what is it all worth? As the legendary frontiersman Buffalo Bill addresses the crowd, welcoming them to this most auspicious affair, Jones takes a deep breath and attempts to steady his nerves. But in a flash, his mind is there again. He is back at Rorke's Drift. It is January 1879. For years, the British have eyed the valuable territory of South Africa for both its natural resources and its geographic location. Diamonds had been discovered in 1867 near the Vaal River, sparking an even greater interest in the territory, especially amongst the local British officials. The ostensible plan, put forward by the notable and notorious Lord Carnarvon, is to institute a white ruling minority that will rule over a native black majority who will provide the workforce to operate British sugar plantations and diamond mining operations. Repeatedly, Lord Carnarvon and the local civilian authority, a man named Sir Henry Bartle Frere, have attempted to establish federations between themselves and the Dutch-descended Boer farmers who have inhabited the area since the 17th century, as well as the Swazi tribe who came to South Africa in the 15th century. However, the valuable territory, replete with natural resources and grandiose beauty, was already under the control of another powerful, militaristic empire, the Zulu. The Zulu had risen to prominence in the early 19th century, sweeping down from the west of Africa under the revolutionary leadership of Shaka Zulu, the legendary chieftain and warlord. Whereas intertribal conflicts on the African continent prior to Shaka's rise had consisted primarily of small raids and generally inconsequential skirmishes, Shaka had formed the Zulu into an enormous war machine that had taken over vast swaths of southern Africa. Under his leadership, the Zulu were molded into a warrior society whose structure and culture more closely resembled the Spartans of ancient Greece than it did any of their African contemporaries. By this time in 1879, the Zulu have seen the passing of their great king Shaka, and a subsequent decades-long power struggle for control of the tribe. Zulu society focuses almost exclusively on warfare, and a young man's advancement in their society is almost entirely dependent on his martial prowess. They operate under what is known as the Ukubutwa system, a term which means to be enrolled. This hierarchical system organizes young men and young women as well, though not as military combatants, according to their age sets. Men of similar age ranges live together in organized barracks, under the command of senior officers. They train in tactics, techniques, strategy, and fitness, all as a unit. The highly organized tactics of the Zulu require not only great numbers of soldiers to execute them, but repetitive and consistent drilling, focusing on even the most granular aspects of movement, communication, and combatives. Zulu weaponry consists of weapons that would, in many ways, seem familiar to a Roman legionnaire. Each Zulu warrior is equipped with a thick cowhide shield emblazoned with black and white designs. While accounts of Zulu shield-stopping bullets are, at best, highly exaggerated, they do provide a notable measure of defensive cover and an offensive option for bracing and pummeling an opponent. Behind their shield, a Zulu warrior carries at least one longer spear for throwing, as well as stabbing, known as an assegai. Oftentimes they carry knob-headed clubs, known as knob carries, made to crash down upon enemy skulls. They also carry another Shaka innovation, a shorter spear, made for close-range stabbing from behind their shields. It is known as an ikwa, named after the sound it makes when withdrawn from an enemy's body. But however revolutionary Shaka may have been in implementing new weaponry and organization, it is his strategic and tactical prowess that had managed to expand his empire at an unprecedented rate. Zulu war formations might, too, have been well familiar to a Roman legionary fighting in the wilds of Gaul nearly 2 millennia prior. Where their opponents' tactics were largely valiant, haphazard attacks, the Zulu are organized in stratified and well-drilled ranks, each positioned on the battlefield according to their age and experience. Each regiment of Zulu warriors is under the command of an officer in charge, distinguished by specific designs on his shield. Experienced and decorated soldiers might carry white shields, in effect distinguishing them as non-commissioned officers. Under Shaka's guidance, the Zulu have become masters of adapting a centuries-old hunting technique known as the horns of the buffalo, in which the main force of warriors holds the middle ground of a battlefield, then feigns retreat, allowing the enemy to advance as Zulu forces to the left and to the right quickly flank their positions and encircle them. Once caught in this trap, destruction is often all but certain. Using these tactics, the Zulu have wrought havoc on all who have opposed them throughout the majority of the 1800s. However, at times when this tactic is not practical, or even more desperate measures are called for, the Zulu are known to put forth unrelenting human waves of head-on charges designed to inflict maximum damage and buy time for retreating forces. By 1879, they are the dominant power throughout the entirety of southeastern Africa. And, in point of fact, as far as most in the British government are concerned, this is fine by them. By this time in the 19th century, Britain is finding itself increasingly overburdened by the enormity of its empire, and is loath to take on the responsibility of overtaking, colonizing, and then governing another remote locale on the planet that the vast majority of its citizens could not find on a map. The British are already ensnared in the Second Anglo-Afghan War, which will last until 1880. In the latter half of the 19th century alone, the British Army would fight in such faraway locales as Burma, Sudan, India, the Crimea, and Egypt, to name but a few. Suffice to say, the British government has little to no interest in expanding into yet another territory, as it would add more to their burden than it would to their wealth. However, this is not the opinion of Lord Carnarvon, nor Sir Bartle Frere, nor is it in keeping with the intentions of one Frederick Augustus Thesiger, 2nd Baron Chelmsford, otherwise known as Lord Chelmsford. Born in 1827 in London, England, the son of a wealthy lawyer and politician, Lord Chelmsford has served in the British Army since 1844, when he had purchased a commission in the Rifle Brigade after failing to obtain a position with the Grenadier Guards. He has served in the Crimean War of 1855, as well as the Indian Rebellion of 1857, steadily rising to the rank of Major General in 1877. Upon his arrival in South Africa, he initially leads campaigns against the Xhosa tribe. These engagements amount to little more than skirmishes and result in the British routing their opponents in relatively short order. In Chelmsford's estimation, no native population armed with only spears and shields, no matter how numerous or well-trained, can compete against the mighty British Army. In Chelmsford's view, the time for cementing his own legacy and fortune, as well as the legacies and fortunes of his cohorts in Lord Carnarvon and Sir Henry Bartle Frere, is at hand. A month prior to this muggy, rain-soaked January, on December 11th of 1878, after spending months besieging the politicians in London with correspondence decrying the brutality of Zulu in the nearby territories, Sir Henry Bartle Frere had issued the Zulu king, King Cetshwayo, a list of ultimatums that the warrior monarch found both confusing and unreasonable. Until this time in the late 1870s, the British had largely gotten along peaceably with the Zulu. King Cetshwayo can see no need for such provocation, but upon reviewing the terms, which included the disbanding of the entire Zulu military, he has found them impossible to agree to. Bartle Frere has counted on this and uses Cetshwayo's refusal to the terms as evidence to his superiors that a Zulu invasion of British territories is imminent, and the only way to stop it is to attack the Zulu first on their own land. Lord Chelmsford is appointed to command the operation, overseeing all British and Allied forces. These forces consist of 12 regular infantry companies, with 6 companies from the 1st and 2nd Battalions and 6 from the 24th Foot Regiment. Including wagon drivers, servants, and civilian personnel, Chelmsford's forces amount to roughly 7,800 people. In comparison to the tens of thousands strong Zulu forces, this is a paltry number of combatants to bring into the field. But Chelmsford feels assured that it will be more than enough. Chelmsford divides his men into 3 columns, and on January 11, 1879, they slog their way across the Buffalo River at a place called Rorke's Drift, officially entering the heart of Zulu country. For his part, William Jones, serving with the 24th Foot Regiment, sees this excursion as yet another in a long line of relatively tedious assignments he has seen in his nearly 2 decades of service in the British Army. He has served in Mauritius, Burma, and India to name but a few of his appointments, but, aside from a smattering of good conduct medals, has accumulated no accolades nor time in combat. He had enlisted in Birmingham in 1858, married his wife Elizabeth on the 25th of May, 1875, and the couple had a son named William. Sadly, though, his wife had died the previous year, and Jones had sent his young son back to England to be cared for by his in-laws until his latest term of service with the Army was complete. Though he is certainly not under the impression that this is an entirely safe, carefree mission, Jones, along with most of the men in the 24th Foot Regiment, are expecting to see little in the way of resistance from the Zulu. Though strained under the aforementioned burdens of supporting a worldwide empire, the British Army is, for all intents and purposes, the dominant military power in the world at this point in time. They are not only largely experienced and universally well-trained, but equipped with some of the most advanced weaponry on the planet at the time in the way of their service rifles and artillery. Each British soldier, clad in their trademark red coats and white helmets, carries the 5.77/450 caliber Martini Henry rifle, with an effective firing range of 400 yards and a rate of fire of up to 12 rounds a minute. The breech-loading single-shot lever-action rifle possessed a mighty recoil and devastating firepower. Each soldier is also equipped with the pattern 1876 Martini Henry socket bayonet, which, when affixed to the end of the Martini Henry rifle, renders their firearms a comparable stabbing threat to that of the Zulu Ikwa. Before crossing the Buffalo River, Major General Chelmsford had split the force into 3 columns. The 2 main columns consist of British troops, with Column 1 being the less experienced troops and Column 3 being the more seasoned soldiers. The smaller column number 2 consists of native African troops and cavalry. Though he is a veteran soldier, William Jones finds himself assigned to the first column with troops who are mostly in their 20s. This column is left at Rorke's Drift, a local trading post and Lutheran mission, under the command of Lieutenant John Chard of the Royal Engineers and Lieutenant Gonville Brumhead of the 24th Foot Regiment, 2 much beloved but underwhelming officers. The rest of the British forces, under the command of Chelmsford, proceed roughly 10 miles inland and make camp at the base of a large, isolated hill known as Isandlwana. Here, 1,800 troops from the 2nd and 3rd columns make camp in the shadow of the imposing monolith. This will be their base in the coming days, as patrols are sent out in order to find and engage Zulu forces. Early on the morning of January 22nd, As the dawn breaks clear and the temperatures begin to climb rapidly, Chelmsford assembles a contingent of troops and heads out in search of the Zulu, and the personal glory that is sure to be had. Within a few hours of Chelmsford's departure, a scouting detachment from Isandlwana crests a nearby ridge, only to stumble upon the entirety of the mighty Zulu army. Upon receiving the news that the British have crossed the Buffalo River, this Zulu force, estimated to be roughly 20,000 strong, has run more than 70 miles over harsh African terrain in scorching temperatures just to get here, within striking distance of the British camp. However, as it is the beginning of a new lunar cycle, the Zulu commander, Koza, has decided to give his men a day of rest, as it is generally considered poor practice to attack on days of what the Zulu refer to as a dead moon. But once the Zulu realize they have been spotted, their forces are roused for an immediate attack. Over the succeeding few hours, 10 to 15,000 Zulu warriors swarm down upon the British at Isandlwana in a relentless series of head-on attacks. By club and spear, they kill every single infantry soldier present. In the middle of the attack, a solar eclipse takes place, casting an eerie pall over an already hellish scene. In vicious close-quarter combat, the Zulu and British stab, shoot, slash, and strike one another in a flurry of violence, rage, and terror, until finally, there are no British left alive. 1,800 veteran soldiers who had awoken that day to yet another yeoman's breakfast of tea and biscuits, expecting to carry out a day of banal drudgery, now lie strewn across the African plains, eviscerated by their Zulu vanquishers who believe that a slain man's soul will stay trapped in his body if not released through his stomach. The Zulu have also taken heavy losses, with between 1,000 to 3,000 of their warriors killed and 2,000 wounded. In a force of 20,000, these losses will prove hugely consequential moving forward. However, there are still many Zulu warriors present, estimates range from 3,000 to 5,000, who have not gotten to participate at all in the battle, as it happened so quickly and with such ferocity. These men, still spoiling for a fight, now turn their attention towards the smaller British encampment at Rorke's Drift. As their comrades pillage the British and honor their dead, this contingent of Zulu embark on yet another exhausting run, this time heading for Rorke's Drift. A scant few cavalrymen have escaped across the Buffalo River and are headed to Rorke's Drift atop their exhausted mounts, having narrowly missed the horrific fates of their comrades. As the Zulu warriors and British survivors make a mad dash towards Rorke's Drift, all in the camp at Rorke's Drift are blissfully unaware that anything out of the ordinary, save for the solar eclipse earlier that day, has taken place. At 104 degrees Fahrenheit, the day is swelteringly hot, even for this time of year. At just after 3 in the afternoon, a group of British troops, as well as a Swedish missionary named Otto Witt, are atop the large hill that overlooks Rorke's Drift, known as Oscarberg Hill. They are attempting to get a look at the campsite at Isandlwana, but are unable to see anything of note from such a distance. Suddenly, they spot a small group of riders coming around the hill towards the campsite at Rorke's Drift. The riders race into camp and inform a shocked Lieutenant Brumhead of what has just occurred at Isandlwana. At a guard shack a little over a mile away, Lieutenant Chard has spotted 2 more riders who inform him of what has happened, and that the Zulus are on their way. Brumhead, Chard, and the other officers hurriedly convene inside the mission building, where a brief but vociferous debate is had on whether or not they should attempt to flee or stay and fight. At the zenith of the argument, Assistant Commissary James Langley Dalton, a 46-year-old former sergeant in the 85th Foot Regiment, advises that the British do all they can to fortify the mission building and hospital against attack, and that they then stay and fight. He reasons that attempting to combat the Zulu from behind even the most meager of defenses gives them a better chance of survival than being caught by the Zulu on the open plains or in attempting to cross the Buffalo River. His rationale is agreed to, and the troops are informed of the situation and immediately ordered to begin building barriers with whatever they can find. With little time to let the situation sink in, William Jones and the remainder of the 140 British troops present, along with 11 colonial troops, begin building walls connecting the buildings in order to create an ad hoc fort. 50-pound boxes of biscuits and 100-pound boxes of cornmeal, staple rations for the British Army, are stacked up upon each other, with the urgency and anxiety of the men building just as rapidly as their fortification. Soon, the mission building and hospital have been connected by one wall on the south side, with another wall building a longer perimeter along the north side, with another wall cutting the courtyard in the middle in two. This would serve as a fallback position should the Zulu overwhelm the first wall. Otto Witt, the Swedish missionary, now takes his lead, making a dash back to tend to his family at another trading post 30 miles away. Just after 4 p.m., a Lieutenant Henderson and 100 cavalrymen arrive from Isandlwana. They are asked by Lieutenant Char to ride out towards the oncoming Zulu and do all that they can to slow them down. Lieutenant Henderson and his men, thoroughly traumatized from the events only hours before at Isandlwana, do their best to oblige. They ride out, but are soon seen hurrying back towards the fort. They have spotted the Zulu warriors, thousands strong, swarming now towards the small haphazard fortifications of Rorke's Drift, and they have decided that they can take no more. With their nerves sufficiently frazzled, the cavalrymen make a mad dash past the men now ensconced behind the walls at Rorke's Drift, hoping to save their own lives. Though no recourse is taken on the cavalrymen, a group of native Natal South African soldiers also begins to flee. Caught up in the confusion, a young corporal named William Anderson, 2nd Battalion, 3rd Regiment of the native Natal contingent, begins to run. Suddenly, the retort of a Martini Henry rings out, and gunsmoke fills the thick, heavy air. At the same instant, the young corporal falls dead, only a few dozen yards away from the walls. In later examination, it is unclear whether Corporal Anderson was indeed abandoning his post or simply confused by the retreat of those around him. Either way, his death will be the first that the British forces at Rorke's Drift will suffer that day. It will certainly, however, not be the last. Minutes after Corporal Anderson breathes his last, a chilling sound can be heard. The haunting, rhythmic, bellicose chants of the Zulu draw nearer and nearer. The 3,000 to 5,000 glory-hungry, indignant, highly trained and experienced Zulu warriors from Isandlwana have arrived, and they have come with the sole intention of wiping out every single British soldier and citizen there, securing themselves the glory they had earlier been denied. At first, the Zulu pepper the British compound with gunfire from Oscarburg Hill. The Zulu are thought to have either acquired muskets from traders or taken the British's own Martini Henrys from the vanquished soldiers at Isandlwana. Though exactly how the Zulu acquired the firearms and which firearms they are will become a matter of some contention, the results for the men now fighting for their lives at Rorke's Drift are the same, as several fall from gunshot wounds. As soon as the fire from the hilltop begins to wither around 4:30 p.m., the first Zulu attack sweeps around the south of the compound and makes a direct assault on the low wall in front of the hospital. Inside of the hospital are several men too sick to be moved, as well as the soldiers assigned to protect the building with gunfire through freshly cut gun holes in the mud brick walls. Among these soldiers is Private William Jones. He, as well as Corporal William Wilson Allen, Privates Cole, Dunbar, Hitch, Horrigan, John Williams, Joseph Williams, Alfred Hook, and Robert Jones have been assigned to defend the hospital and the men within it. The hospital building, however, presents a daunting prospect to defend, as 3 of its rooms are disconnected from the main room of the building. These rooms have only one door leading in and out of the room itself. Inside of these rooms, now struggling to steady his nerves along with the rest of his comrades, is William Jones. He and the rest of the men inside know that, should the Zulu break through the barricade and assault the hospital building directly, they will be trapped. But there is no time left to address this now, as the Zulu attack is on. The British received the first attack by firing upon the charging warriors first at about 600 yards, mostly to little effect. However, the successive volleys, as the Zulu advance nearer and nearer, chanting loudly and swinging their shields rhythmically, are more effective. Many Zulu fall, but the charge carries on until they are within 50 yards of the low barricade. Then the Zulu fall back, to reorganize for another attack. Within minutes, that attack comes, and then another. Again and again, the Zulu assault the low wall on the north side, with several attacks reaching the wall and resulting in brutal hand-to-hand combat, as the defenders desperately fought to hold their ground from behind their makeshift barriers. Finally, At around 6 p.m., Lieutenant Chard pulls his men off the north wall, as the losses being inflicted are too heavy to continue its defense. This saves the majority of his troops, but leaves the men in the isolated rooms trapped, as their only route of escape is now blocked by thousands of Zulu warriors bearing down upon them. The attacks continue on relentlessly, with the greatest ferocity focused on the trapped and vulnerable men in the isolated rooms. Soon, it is clear to the men inside the closet-sized room next to the veranda that the building will be overtaken by the Zulu. As Privates Horrigan and Joseph Williams pull their revolvers and cut down the Zulu breaching the doorway, John Williams digs at the wall separating their room from the next room. Eventually, he makes it through to the next room, and the men are able to escape the room nearest the veranda, dragging the patients through the hole with them. In the next room, and the next, the process is repeated for the better part of an hour. As John Williams frantically digs, the fight rages on, with the soldiers in each room firing through the doors and windows in the desperate attempts to keep the Zulu at bay. One of the patients is eventually seized by the Zulu, dragged out of the door, and stabbed to death in front of the hospital. Another has to be left as he is too delirious with fever to be moved through the holes being dug in the walls. Private Waters, a defender in the second room, panics as the rest of the British squeeze through into the third room just before the Zulu swarm in. Waters does, however, manage to jump into a wardrobe in the room, and, in their haste to continue their assault into the next room, the Zulu do not find him. William Jones has been desperately defending his assigned position in the room closest to the courtyard and is unaware that the other soldiers have been methodically tunneling their way towards him for nearly an hour. He is at first greatly panicked by the unexpected breaching of the wall, and then quickly relieved at the sight of friendly faces making their way, one by one, through the hole. But momentary relief brought on by the sight of his comrades is quickly replaced by the sickening smell of smoke. The Zulu have set fire to the building. The only means of escape now is for the defenders and patients, many of whom are gravely ill or wounded by this point, to make a 6-foot drop out of the window of the third room into the courtyard between the hospital and the mission building where the rest of the British force is ensconced. Seeing that this is the only possible course of action, 2 soldiers at the mission, Lance Corporal William Allen and Private Fred Hitch, make a mad dash across the open, exposed courtyard and assist in lowering the patients, and then the soldiers, through the window and onto the ground. William Jones is one of the last defenders in the hospital, resolutely firing upon the Zulu attackers until the barrel of his rifle is so hot he has to wrap it in his red tunic in order to continue shooting. As smoke fills the room and the Zulu begin to breach the door, Williams finally drops through the window and into the courtyard, where he, Lance Corporal Allen, and Private Hitch make their way across the deadly 50 yards separating the buildings, now fully illuminated by the light of the burning hospital. Of the 11 patients in the hospital, they have managed to save 9. All of the able-bodied defenders of the hospital, even Private Waters, who has hidden himself away in the wardrobe of the second room, are still alive. But their fight is not over. For the remainder of the night, attack after attack pours down upon the troops at the compound. The men fight on desperately, with each soldier firing at least 100 rounds, their shoulders and ears suffering from the rifle's mighty roar and recoil. However, their accuracy is now aided by the light of the flames coming from the hospital roof. The Zulu make desperate, courageous charge after charge, but more and more are cut down by British rifle fire as the night wears on. Finally, just as dawn breaks, the Zulu attacks begin to slow, then cease altogether. The Zulu commander present, Prince Dabulamanzi Kampande, has breached the orders of his brother, the Zulu King Katsueo, who has approved the attack of Isandlwana, but not this additional attack on Rorke's Drift. As his losses continue to mount, the rogue Zulu commander begins to fear more and more that he will incur the wrath of his king. Finally, at around 8 a.m., the Zulu are seen again, this time roughly half a mile away, well outside of the range of the British. For a short while, the warriors rest in the morning sun and take snuff. These warriors, mostly veterans ranging in age from their 30s to their 50s, have eaten little to nothing over the course of the last 48 hours. They have run what amounts to several marathons back to back, only to carry out nearly 24 straight hours of the most ruthless, costly combat they have likely ever seen. They have lost many men here, with an estimated 350 killed and 500 wounded, and they too are tired. After a brief respite, the Zulu rise and then depart. A reserved sense of relief overtakes the British. They are unsure if more Zulu forces are nearby or whether or not General Chelmsford and his men are even still alive, much less on the way to reinforce them. However, not long after the Zulu depart, a line of horsemen in red coats and white helmets is seen on the horizon. At first, the survivors at Rorke's Drift cannot believe their eyes. It is General Chelmsford's column. Finally, the British can breathe at least a measured sigh of relief. 17 of their 141 troops have been killed in the fight, along with 15 men wounded. An additional fatality is nearly incurred when Private Waters comes bounding towards the camp, his face smeared black with coal and covered in a large black jacket. He had found the jacket in the wardrobe of the abandoned room, thrown it over his head, and fled, through the attacking Zulu, into the darkness of the night. He had hidden in a ditch until sunlight, being repeatedly trampled upon by charging Zulu who did not notice him. When he was spotted by the weary, worn-out riflemen, he was nearly shot. Several of the defenders of the hospital of Rorke's Drift have incurred terrible injuries, with Henry Hook being hit by the glancing blow of a Zulu's spear and now bleeding profusely from a gash in his forehead, and John Williams' hands being rubbed raw from the incessant, frantic digging. To a man, all will suffer from the wounds they incurred in the fight for the remainder of their lives. They, along with the other wounded, have been tended to by Surgeon James Henry, who worked fearlessly and tirelessly through the night, treating the wounded and dying. Amidst the gunfire and screams, the surgeon and the soldiers hear the sharp barks and yips of the surgeon's loyal terrier, Jack. As his master worked, Jack did his best throughout the night to alert the defenders to any Zulu hiding behind the walls of biscuit tins and cornmeal bags. In the coming days, Chelmsford's troops will scour the surrounding countryside, killing any Zulu they can find. General Chelmsford will spend the next few weeks and months attempting to save his reputation and to exact his revenge on any Zulu he can find. In the aftermath of Rorke's Drift, the battle will be held up in the British media as an example of at least some measure of British retribution in the face of their outright slaughter at Isandlwana. The Victoria Cross, the British Army's highest award for valor in combat, will be awarded to more British troops in this battle than any battle in British military history. In total, 11 Victoria Crosses are awarded. With great honor and ceremony, the medals are pinned to the chests of Lieutenant John Chard, Lieutenant Gonville Brumhead, Corporal William Wilson Allen, Private Frederick Hitch, Private Alfred Henry Hook, Private Robert Jones, Private John Williams, Sergeant Major James Henry Reynolds, Corporal Christian Ferdinand Scheiss, and Private William Jones. William will leave the Army in 1880, as will most of the survivors of Rorke's Drift. He moves back to Birmingham and attempts to restart his life with a series of menial labor jobs. Like many of the survivors, Jones struggles to readjust to the normalities of day-to-day life in Victorian England. He was unable to establish himself in a career and has thus, in 1887, signed on with Buffalo Bill Cody's Wild West show as they make their tour through Europe. Now, here in Earl's Court amidst the clamor and clatter backstage, he snaps out of the memory he has relived so many times and steels his resolve for another performance. He clears his head as best he can and does his best to forget the pain of his rheumatism, another after effect of his time spent in the rain-soaked, sun-scorched misery of Rorke's Drift. His job is to give his account of that terrible day, as well as a general retrospective on the Anglo-Zulu War. Each time he does, his nostrils fill with the smell of the bodies that had been left to burn in the hospital. But he carries on. William gives his account for the crowd, including the Queen, as he will do time and again for crowds throughout Europe in the coming months. But the funds from these performances will last but a short time, and he will continue to struggle financially. He will be forced to pawn his Victoria's Cross in 1910 and is admitted to a workhouse, an institution for those unable to care for themselves, in Manchester. Many nights he wakes in a panic and attempts to charge out of the building, believing that he is back in Rorke's Drift and that the Zulus are attacking. He will pass away on April 15, 1913, and be buried in a pauper's grave in Phillips Park Cemetery in Manchester. Though he would finally receive a proper gravestone in 2007 after a 4-year public campaign, his unfortunate ending is, tragically, not at all unique amongst the survivors of Rorke's Drift. The fight that saved their lives, in many cases, also permanently scarred them, physically and psychologically, as it likely did their Zulu enemies, who fought just as hard and suffered greatly. But the battle at Rorke's Drift would not only go on to shape the lives of its participants, but to shape the public view of the British involvement in Africa. The expansion of their territory there, as well as the conquering of the Zulu, would quickly come to be seen as an empirical necessity for the British. The Anglo-Zulu War, as it would come to be known, will go on to be regarded as one of the most seminal campaigns in British military history. By midsummer of 1879, the Zulu Empire would be soundly routed by the British after several costly battles. But the stories of those battles, as well as the countless stories of heroism and brutality on both sides, are other stories for other times. Thank you for joining us on this episode of History at the OK Corral. Be sure to click the like button, share this episode with a friend, and become a subscriber. Also, if you'd like to support our work and gain early access to episodes, as well as ad-free viewing, you can become a member of this channel by clicking the Join button, or you can click the link in the description below to become a member on Patreon. Thank you again for watching, and we'll see you next time on History at the OK Corral, home of history's greatest shootouts and showdowns.